Welcome, guys. Glad you guys are already seated. We could switch it up and have everybody stand the whole time, but that would not be a good first impression. So let's not do that today. But for those of you that have not met me quite yet, my name is Max Patton. A lot of you probably know me as Sydney's husband or Birdie's dad, and those are definitely my favorite titles. But I'm actually the student pastor here at RockPointe. And quick, shameless plug, I'm just going to say it. We have camp coming up here in a few weeks, and I could not be more excited. We're going to a new spot with new leaders. Everything is going to be brand new, and it's going to be awesome. It's life on the lake, and I'm so excited. So the invitation is not just sign up for camp. The invitation is to come with me, come with our leaders. We're excited to have all of you. It is not too late to register. There's plenty of time, and there's a few spots left, so come with me on that. But like I said, I'm the student pastor here now. I've been here for about a year and a half, and I could not be more excited to be a part of this church family here with you guys. As most of our students know by now, I love good stories. I love to hear good stories. I love to tell good stories. And if I'm being honest, I like to make up stories. Like my fish was about that big. And so big fan of stories. And so for just a minute, let me tell you a story about me. So I was a junior in high school. And as a football player, it was required that I do one of the other spring sports, right? So I could stay in shape, so I could stay agile, so I could be ready for when spring football came around. And unfortunately for me, I was not a fan of any of the other spring sports. And so I didn't really have a lot of options because there was baseball, but I have never played a single organized inning of baseball. I still haven't. So that was out the window. And I was strong, but I wasn't powerlifting strong, so that really wasn't an option. And then there was soccer, and if I'm being honest, I didn't know people played that past preschool until I got to high school. I love it. I know. It's football, but let's be real. There's real football out there too. And so, but that's just really, it wasn't my thing. And so that left me with one option, which was track. Now, I do not like to run. If you see me running, help me. I'm running from something, right? So help me. Okay, there's something wrong if that happens, right? But regardless, I could hear this voice in the back of my head. And what it was saying was all athletes run. And undoubtedly, it was my dad's voice. And that was something that he always had told me. And so as anybody who has had to endure a track season before would know, you have to do these things called time trials. And essentially what they are is you have to run each race and you get time to figure out where you best fit and where you might best benefit the team. And so we had gone through a couple of them over a few days, and then finally we landed on this one Tuesday that I will never forget, where we did a 400-meter sprint time trial. And what I was about to find out is that the 400-meter sprint is not a fast race, at least not for me, right? Because regardless of the fact that I can see the starting line and the finishing line at the same time, there is a lot of ground to cover. But I get up there, I have this false confidence because I know I have to do this anyways. But I get up there and I'm in the first heat for God knows why. But I'm up there and I'm looking around and I kind of recognize some of the guys and I knew that they did track, but in my head, I was telling myself, oh, I got this. I got these guys. This is going to be nothing. I'm going to dust them. The firing gun goes off and I start. And we get around the first 100 meters, and so everybody is about even because we just finished the curve. And everything's going good. We're right in stride. We're about the same distance. We're all together. And I'm feeling really good. And I feel a little bit of a burn, but we're running, and I figure that's normal. And so we keep going, and I kind of have this thought again of, you know what? I'm going to dust these fools. Like hearing about the next 100 meters, I'm just going to start to separate. It's just going to work out, right? Like I got this. No problem. I got this. And what was a burn turned into a roaring fire in my legs. Started to cramp up, and I lost my form so bad that my coach from across the field decided he needed to tell me, quit joking. Like, this is not a joke. This is a time trial. Keep going. I wasn't joking. I was just in pain. It was bad. And then finally we keep going, and I make the third turn, and I've got the finish line, and I look up, and I see what I think is Jesus, but it's just my coach, and he's waiting for me. And at this point, I'm in full-on speed walk mode. And it's unholy noises coming out. I'm like, Like, it's just bad. It's just not good. It's just not good. Like, it goes from bad to ugly, and here's worse, is that there's people in the stands who are not on the team, just waiting for their ride. And they're telling me things like, you don't have to finish if it hurts. Like, just stop. Like, it was just bad. It's just bad. It was humiliating. And finally, I crossed the finish line where my coach goes, click, but he didn't press the button. He said it out loud because he stopped timing me a long time ago, right? He was over that, okay? And he greeted me so warmly with, congrats, new record, the slowest time we have ever recorded here. So yeah, that was track for me in a nutshell. Did not like it, but turns out I'm just not a 400-meter sprint kind of guy. Turns out I was just running the wrong race. And so maybe you've kind of felt like that recently. Maybe you're running really hard and you're not seeing the growth that you thought you would or that you wanted to. Or maybe you've fallen and you've tripped and you're not really sure how you're going to get up or if you should even keep going. You see, every one of us, just like me in that 400, we all have our own race to run, our own unique path that God has marked out for each of us. And here's the thing about our races or our lives, is that no two are exactly the same. You see, some days it's really easy. We're going downhill, it's sunny, 75 degrees, there's even a little bit of a breeze at your back. Things are clicking, they're making sense, and they're just going well. And then there's other days where it's uphill, it's storming, it just feels like complete drudgery, and every next step is just harder than the last. And unfortunately, I don't have to convince you very, very much that life isn't always consistent and that it's not always comfortable either. But the truth is that it is our life, and we do have a decision. We get a choice of how we're going to take what we're given and what we run and how we run. And so part of what makes running our race difficult is that we've experienced some of the same things that I did during this 400-meter time trial. Things like comparison, things like our own limitations, or things like busyness or distractions. And a lot of times we look around and we wonder, why isn't my race like theirs? Or we hit a wall, physically, emotionally, spiritually, and we start to think, I don't know if I can keep going, or if I even should. And sometimes we just get caught up in the things happening around us, from social media to the opinions of other people to our own fears, and sometimes even the expectations that other people have put on us. But we get caught up in those things so much sometimes that we forget of what we're supposed to be running towards and why we're running in the first place. And don't get me wrong, these are very real obstacles. They're very real things that are in front of us. But just like any race, they're not the end of the story. And they're not the finish line either. They're moments that we have to decide who we're going to become and why we're still running. And with Jesus as our focus, we can keep going, step by step and day by day, trusting that he's there with us, but also to know that the race that we're running actually matters. And that's exactly what we find here in Hebrews chapter 12, verses 1 and 2. It says this. It says, therefore, since we are surrounded by such a great cloud of witnesses, let us throw off everything that hinders and the sin that so easily entangles. And let us run with the perseverance the race marked out for us, fixing our eyes on Jesus, the pioneer and perfecter of our faith. Simply put, the race mentioned here in this verse is just a metaphor for our lives, specifically the journey of faith that we walk with Jesus. And you see, the author is encouraging believers to stay faithful, even when it's hard, and get this, even when we get in our own way. Now, some context here helps just a little bit. And so the book of Hebrews was written to a group of people who were ethnically and religiously Jewish, but had decided to follow the way, or the way of Jesus. And so they're fresh in this new race, and they're facing a lot of pressure to go back to what is familiar, go back to what's comfortable, go back to what everybody else expects from you. But the author is telling us something the exact opposite. He's saying, don't quit. Don't turn back, and keep going. See, the passage is a call to endurance, and it tells us to take a hard look at our lives to identify the things that are slowing us down or pulling us away from God. Things like distractions or unhealthy habits, or even things that are good things that have taken the wrong priority in our life. So the point is this, that if something is keeping you from running your race well, you've got to throw it off. Don't manage it. Throw it off. And before we go any further, I want to say this too, that if you follow Jesus or you don't follow Jesus, by examining the three things that we're going to talk about today and choosing to do something about them, not just hearing it, not just noticing it, but choosing to do something about them will change the way that you go through life in a positive way. So let's get to it. There's the three things that can derail our race. And the first thing is comparison. It says in Galatians 6:4 that each one should test their own actions, that they can take pride in themselves alone without comparing themselves to someone else. This is something that we all deal with. I probably compared myself to 5 people on the way here today, just thinking about today. But the problem with comparison is that we don't always perceive right away how destructive it can be in our lives until the symptoms are strong enough that we can start to feel the erosion that's happening within us, but also around us. You see, we scroll social media and we compare our day-to-day life to somebody's highlight reel, and we wonder, am I doing it right? Why doesn't it look like that? Or we judge our kids against somebody else's kids. Like, oh, my kid walked at 3 months, and my kid's the starter on the basketball team. Well, mine did neither of those. Am I doing something wrong? Or even we complain about the jobs that we wanted, but we didn't get because that person got it. But the list goes on. There's probably an instance that came into your mind already, right? But the trouble with comparison is that it keeps you focused on someone else's race while it trips you up in your own. And when we come out on the other side, it results in one of two things. We either begin to feel superior or we begin to feel inferior. And neither of those things helps us to live with peace or purpose, and they definitely don't reflect the way that Jesus believed, lived, or spoke. You see, when we live superior in our minds, we begin to assume that we have some sort of position over somebody else. We start to hold contempt for them. We start to say things like, I can't believe that they would blank. Or things like, how could they do that? Like, I would never do that. Maybe for them, but not for me. I can't, because I'm this and they're not. Right? Or my personal favorite, I got this from my grandmother a lot growing up. Oh, bless your heart. Right? That was, I'm smarter than you and you just found out why. And I got that quite a bit, right? But the problem is not only that we begin to think that we have some position over somebody, but when it starts to take root in our hearts, we create this wall that stops us from becoming more like Jesus. And we develop this aversion to serving other people. And people are no longer people at that point. They're just problems that wear names. And that couldn't be further from the heart of Jesus. And please don't confuse confidence with this feeling of superiority. You see, confidence is present regardless of who is around. But this feeling of superiority is present because somebody is around. And on the other side, when we live with this inferiority in our hearts, we find ourselves free-falling through this spiral a lot of times. We start to wonder if the odds are constantly stacked against us and if we should keep going, if people actually care about what we're doing or if they even care about us. And maybe we even start to consider if this race is worth it at all, if we should just keep going. And I want you to hear it from me, that you were made on purpose and for a purpose, and that you are worth it. Don't give up. You see, comparison is a silent killer for those who want to make the most of what God has designed them to be. By comparing ourselves to someone else, we're doing ourselves a disservice because the only thing that comparison helps us to do is to become a lesser version of somebody else. So what if? What if comparison wasn't you versus someone else, but what if it was you versus who you were yesterday? What if we stopped treating it as a competition and we started to treat it more like a journey? What if we stopped treating it as if every single life was the same? I mean, the 10,000 meter run and the 100 meter sprint are both awesome races and powerful in their own way. And get this, both have a chance at gold, but they're not the same. So why do we compare things that aren't the same? But what do we do about it, right? A lot of times we compare ourselves and we're really asking ourselves a question, which is, am I enough? Or is what I have enough? Or is what I can provide enough? So instead of looking to our Creator, the one who made us, for reassurance, we start to look to the left and to the right as insurance. And we start to say things like, at least I don't have that problem. But why doesn't my life look like that? We start to look anywhere else but the one that designed us, the one that made us. And it's incredibly hard to compare yourself when you're grateful for what God has designed you to be and what he's put in our lives. It's incredibly hard to do that. So instead of just trying to cut off this comparison that so naturally comes up within us, what if we replaced it with something better? What if we became grateful for what God has already placed in us and placed in front of us? The second thing is this. The second thing that derails our race is our own limitations. 2 Corinthians chapter 12, verse 9, it says this. It says, "My grace is sufficient for you, for my power is made perfect in weakness," and that is good. But let's talk about limits real quick, and let's just get on the same page before we go any further. Limits are the things in our lives that we cannot live blissfully unaware of. We all have limits. It's not because we're weak. We're just human. We're just human. And in a world that constantly tells us to be limitless, to do it all, to have it together, to show no weakness and don't ask for help, it can feel like weakness to admit that we actually do have some limits. But the truth is that limits most of the time are not failures. Many of them are God-given. And this is a lot of times where we start to compare ourselves to other people. Our own limitations are where we look around and we say, what about this? Why not that? And although we have really unique limits and that we're designed way differently than each other, they tend to show up in 5 common areas. And here they are. The first one is personality. It doesn't take a lot for us to look around and realize that we're not the same people, that we're not wired the same way that everybody else is here. And that's not a problem. It's just different. Our season of life. Did you just get married? Did you just have a child? Did you just move? Did you go through divorce? Are you healing from loss? Your season of life will change things, and it puts limits in our life for just a while. The third thing is marriage or singleness. These things come with their own limits, right? There's also family of origin, right? Who you're raised with, how you're raised, and where you're raised. Those things definitely have an impact. Now hear me. They don't determine the finish line, and they don't determine how well you run the race, but they definitely have an impact. And the last thing this is where we tend to compare ourselves quite a bit, is our time and our resources. We all have various amounts of time, money, and attention. It's just true. So why do we compare? What's the purpose? But we all have limits. And until we recognize that we do have these limits and that some of them are intentionally placed by God, we'll keep exhausting ourselves trying to overcome something that was never meant to be defeated, but rather were areas where God was trying to tell us that his strength is perfect in our weakness, and especially where we can't have it all together. So sometimes when we view these limits as obstacles and we decide to push through, what if they were invitations to depend on God more deeply? You see, God's purpose for your life isn't always about maximizing potential or just going beyond what we think we can. Sometimes it's about who you're becoming when you're faced with limits, and decide that you're going to lean on him and not fight what he's designed for you. Because it's in those very places where we feel like we're not enough, we feel like we're incapable, or we feel like we can't do it, that God says, my grace is sufficient for you. His power doesn't just show up in our strength, but it actually is revealed in our surrender. And if you're not sure what you believe about God just yet, I want to invite you to consider this. What if our weakness had less to do with our dysfunction and had more to do with a deeper invitation to grace? A clue that we weren't meant to carry everything alone. But what do we do about our limits? Well, let me say this. It is incredibly hard to defeat something that you cannot define. And so take some time this week and figure out where your limits are in your own life. Truth is, we're already pretty well acquainted with where we think we can't measure up. But take some time to discern whether or not these are obstacles that God has put in our way to push through, to overcome, or if he's put those in our life as a guide to know what the race marked out for us really looks like. The truth is that we're going to have some in both. And then the third thing that derails us from our race is busyness. And it says this in Ecclesiastes 4:6. It says, "Better one handful with tranquility than with two handfuls full of toil and chasing the wind." Or in other words, it's better to live a life with peace and purpose, even if it looks smaller or less busy. It's better than to constantly chase more, do more, and still feel empty at the end. And here's something that we usually miss when it comes to busyness, is that busyness is often a discrete form of laziness. And I know that sounds backwards, right? How can doing more be doing less? How can going harder feel like there's less progress? How is being busy actually lazy? But here's the idea, is that when we stay busy all the time, filling our lives with tasks, activities, and events, we often use that same busyness to avoid the deeper, more difficult work that our souls need, the heart's work, the conversations that we're putting off that we know we need to have, the healing that we need but we're struggling to face, and the spiritual steps that we know we need to take, but we keep pushing back just a little bit at a time because we're honestly a little nervous because it feels kind of risky. And then, when those things don't get done, we say, I just didn't have time. But the truth is, we did. We just spent it on easier, more comfortable things so that what looks like hustle or living my best life now is actually just avoidance in disguise. And just because something is a good opportunity doesn't necessarily mean that it's God's opportunity. Not every open door is meant for us to walk through, and some things that we say yes to will actually pull us away from the race that God has marked out for us. And we don't need to live with two handfuls of chaos when God is offering a handful of peace. Now, hear me out. I'm not talking about the real, unavoidable demands of life that we face, like managing and raising kids, sports, doctor's appointments, groceries, bills, work, and on top of all that, trying to have some sort of social life with our friends and our family. That's not what I'm talking about. That's life, and it's like that sometimes. But what I'm really talking about is the constant nagging voice in our heads that keeps telling us that being busy all the time is not just normal, but that it's the best way to live. That somehow, if we're not running at full speed all the time, that we're falling behind. You see, during the 400 meter, I wasted a lot of energy trying to sprint the entire thing when what I really needed was to be pacing myself. And busyness has a tendency to turn into that if we're not careful. This constant running at full speed without strategy or rest. So here's the reality when it comes to busyness, is that busyness does not always equal importance. It does not always equal value. And it does not always mean that you're becoming the person that you were designed to be. Unless the people that we want to become are constantly overwhelmed, distracted, and exhausted, busyness probably isn't the goal. So what do we do about this busyness issue? Well, the word no holds a lot more power than we think it does. More often than not, we perceive the word no as this personal rejection. But what if we learn to see it as protection for the things that really need our attention for the better? What if we used it as protection from trying to manage chaos with more chaos? So let's be okay with saying no. And on the flip side, if you get told no, let's try not to take it so personally at first. There could be something deeper happening there. And so to finish, let me ask you this. What if the race you're running wasn't just about checking off accomplishments, about outpacing others, or filling our lives so full that we start to go numb, but that instead it was about transformation? What if it was less about how fast we ran or how much we did, and more about who we became as we went? What would change if we stopped chasing this noise of comparison, if we stopped exhausting ourselves past our limits, and we stopped accepting busyness as this badge of honor? What if we embraced our unique path with intention, clarity, and peace? You see, the race that's marked out for you wasn't meant to destroy you, but it is meant to shape you. See, the funny thing about this 400-meter time trial was that I didn't even want to be there in the first place, right? Like, I had no desire to be there. Yet there I was, taking full advantage of it in the wrong way. I was comparing myself to find out that these guys were going to go to college for track scholarships. That's who I was comparing myself to. I was pushing myself past my limits that it turns out weren't obstacles. They were just gifts that weren't meant for the 400. And then I decided that I would busy my mind with any thought the entire race other than just accepting maybe this race isn't for me. Unfortunately, I've had to learn a lot of this the hard way. I've tried to outpace my own limits, and I've tried to become somebody that I'm really not. I've compared myself more often than I'm really excited to admit. I've ended up saying yes to way too many things that were really good, but only on paper. And I've stayed very busy, sometimes to a fault. But every time I ended up more distant from who I really wanted to be and where I really wanted to be. And that was just closer to Jesus. But when I refocus on the founder and perfecter of our faith, even for just a moment, I start to find clarity again. Not perfection in myself, but in the purpose and who I was designed to be. And I want to encourage the same thing for all of us too. So whether you're trying to follow Jesus or not, and maybe you just want help figuring out life, I know that this is true. You run your best race when you free yourself from comparison, when you're grounded in your limits and are present enough to gain peace and clarity. Thanks again. Let's pray. God, thank you so much for you. Lord, I pray that we would ignore comparison, that we would stay out of our own way when it comes to this race, that we would recognize who you are and who you have designed us to be, and that is not imperfect, but perfectly imperfect, and that you have called us to lean on you. And so, Lord, help us to run this race with perseverance and looking to you as the founder and perfecter of our faith. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.